I was reading The Lord of the Rings, and I came upon a passage, and it's where Samwise wakes up to discover that the worst that seemed inevitable didn't in fact happen. And he wakes up and he asks this beautiful question. He asks, what's happened to the world? Is everything sad going to come untrue? And I had to put the book down because I started to weep, because I realized that this is the gospel. This is the essence of the gospel. It's the way that the Lord, He's written this concept into the way the world works. In the springtime leaf, you guys go through winters here, you know what it's like, a winter, this oppressive cold that seems like, a war of attrition that chokes off every green thing. And that's what fear and despair is like, And yet every year we watch as this assault of winter is undone by something as delicate as flowers of springtime, It's what Easter's all about. The most tragic thing in history happens. We murder the Son of God and we lay him in the ground like a seed. And what takes root on Easter morning is the undoing of the curse. If we have eyes to see it, and sometimes I know, admittedly, it is difficult to see it. Difficult to keep hoping that this could be true, How many of you guys know what the word Emmanuel means? I think we all know what that means, right? What's it mean? God with us, right? Emmanuel, God with us. And tonight I just want to remind you, hopefully encourage you, that whatever sadness you're in, Emmanuel, God with us. If he's not with us in our sadness and our brokenness, then he's not with us at all, Emmanuel. I want to talk to you about Emmanuel. Emmanuel is the name of a friend of mine I met a year ago. He was a young boy growing up in Rwanda during the genocide there. And he watched as a man walked into their home, into their living room, and murdered his father right there in their living room. Just walked in, murdered him for no reason. And Emmanuel, you can imagine the horror, And he took all that hurt and that anger, and it forged an identity in him. And Emmanuel, his identity was he was going to grow up and hunt down the man who killed his father, and he was going to have revenge. That's who he was. In the aftermath of all that happened there, World Vision was on the scene, and they built a school. And one of the teachers in the school took interest in Emmanuel and began to share the gospel with him. And Emmanuel talks about how he resisted it at first because he instinctively knew that to give his heart to Christ, he would lose his identity. He'd have to abandon his hatred and his anger. So he held out. But one day the teacher, it was a music class, and it was the combination of the words of a hymn and the music, and it got through to Emmanuel. And he gave his heart to Jesus. And he talks about how in a moment, the anger and the hatred just evaporated. And he says that he felt joy for the first time in his life. And he ran home. He told his mom, he said, I'm going to start going to church. And his mom said, no, you are not going to church, because she had her own anger yet to deal with, But he'd go to church, and he'd get home, and he'd get whipped for it, actually. But he would continue to go. Which is weird, because here in America, like, the opposite is true. We usually have to whip them to get them to go to church. I was hoping for more of a laugh. Now it just feels like an inappropriate joke and a heartwarming story. But anyway, but it's funny because it's true. Anyway, nobody laughed at that either. I'm sorry. My mom thinks I'm really funny, though. That's the thing. She's always like, "You're so funny," and then I get confidence, and then anyway. Emmanuel was faithful to the Lord, and the Lord was faithful to Emmanuel, raised him up, and he ended up becoming a tutor in the palace of the president. Wow. And working with the president's daughters. And one day he's playing his music there in the palace, and the president overhears him and hangs out and listens to him and comes to him and says, "Emmanuel, your music is beautiful. would you help us to rewrite our national anthem? We need a new national anthem about reconciliation and forgiveness, the very things that our nation needs right now. And Emmanuel, these were the things that he knew. He knew of these things, an expert of them, and he helped write a new national anthem, became the voice of a nation. But before that, he became the heart of a nation. You see, because he also tracked down the man who killed his father, and he went and he knocked on the door and he introduced himself, and the man fell on his knees and begged for mercy. And Emmanuel said, Christ has forgiven me. I forgive you. And he led the man to Christ. They became close friends, and they spend time weekly with each other. And it's a beautiful story. It's the kind of story that only God could tell, you know? And this is the kind of story he wants to tell through our lives too. You know, he can take our sadness. He can take the sad things of our lives. This is how he makes them come untrue. He strips them of their power to define and imprison us. He offers us this wonderful possibility where we can bring him the worst that hell and the world has done to destroy our lives, and we bring it to the Lord. And he'll take it and turn it around and use it against hell to build his kingdom. And that is a sweet revenge that we get to participate in, you know? And this is how he makes sad things come untrue. As the person who struggles with depression is the one who knows how to speak a word of hope and mercy to someone else who struggles with depression. The addict knows how to minister to the addict, you know?